Up next, we have Gabriel, the EU front-end director at AKQA. And hello,
Exactly.
Gabriel.
Hi, Jen.
Thank you
Hi,
for
everyone.
joining us today.
Thanks a lot for having me. So I'm more than delighted to be here to present you one of the latest projects we've released at AKQA, the Sennheiser global e-commerce platform. We are really proud of it. This is a project we've done for Sennheiser, as I said, and it looks really great. But one reason we're so happy is because we've released it in under 11 weeks of development. So that's a really short amount of time. So before I begin, a few words about myself. So my name is Gabriel Slama. I'm a Europe front-end director at AKQA, and also proud to be a member of the Mac Alliance, part of the Tech Council. So a bit of context about the project. Sennheiser came to us in a quite specific situation because they've always been composed of two different entities, the professional and the consumer business. Recently, the consumer entity got acquired by the Sonova group, meaning they had to jump out of the existing environment. And by jumping out, I mean having to create a brand new website in a really short amount of time. This is why. And also, obviously, they wanted to take this opportunity to deliver a brand new flagship experience and take their digital home, have a new digital home for the brand. So that was almost a rebuild from scratch that we had to done in this time. And obviously, we are quite happy with the results. We solved quite a few of the frustration that the client had to deal with. To make sure it was a success, we early in the project agreed with some priorities, with some pillars with the client. Those four pillars that we define are building a future-proof website. Future-proof is important because when you have only 11 weeks of development, it may be easy to rush, to go too fast, and potentially to have a website that doesn't scale well. So this is why we wanted to have a really low, as low as possible technical depth next to zero. Also, we wanted to keep it mobile first, to keep performance in mind. So make it really simple to build on top of this solid base afterward. Second, we wanted to increase the engagement, making sure the client understand everything Sennheiser has to offer in terms of audio quality. And third, grow online sales. This sounds pretty obvious for an e-commerce website, but in this case, the website is composed of 26 different countries, 14 languages, and 15 shops. So that's a major challenge. And the last one, that is not totally part of this MVP that we had to build, is the increase of the retention and the brand loyalty. So obviously, we do have transactional emails, but later on, we will work at making sure that people remain aware about the upcoming products and also to add personalizations and other features. So this is the ecosystem they had previously before we had to rebuild some part of this ecosystem. Each of the blue squares you can see is a separate Shopify instance. And those Shopify instances are subdivided in some cases, as you can see on the left. And also there are many languages. Some of them were handled by Sennheiser directly. Some of them were only supported. The main pain point here was especially for the marketing team, because every time they wanted to push some content, let's say on the homepage to announce a new product, they had to reach out to many different teams, many different agencies, and this was almost impossible for them to get all those websites in sync. So this is the timeline we defined. The first 4 weeks were mostly focused at an analysis of the gaps that the clients were experiencing, making sure we go in the right direction. So during this session, we worked a lot all together to find what bottlenecks we were trying to solve, because it could be easy to rush and start coding right away, start designing right away. But first, we want to know really what we're trying to address. And at the same time, we initiated some work on the tech architecture so we can envision what would be the future. Once we got ready, we started working on the pilot, and the pilot phase is really interesting because it's not a proof of concept, it's not a prototype, but it's an actually working version of the project that we released to a market, the first market being Germany. And once considered satisfied, we would then, and this is where we are at the moment we're speaking, scaling, meaning rolling out to many more countries, and later on adding more features to enhance the user experience. So 11 weeks of development may seem a bit short, so I'm going to share with you some ingredients of the success and how we did it. First of all, as I mentioned, we are also invited here by GraphCMS, but we are part of the Mac Alliance, as they do, and as Netlify do, that is also part of this ecosystem. So definitely a decoupled architecture, a Mac architecture is really important. And when I will go further in details, but first, we focused on what we know to do the best at AKQA, the UI, and the visual aspects. And this is really important. I know this is a talk that is about API, but this matters because what we wanted is to what we wanted and what we always want and always do is to think separately the UI and the API, because what we want is to make sure the user has a consistent user experience across the pages, across the websites, and even on mobile applications. So what we do is that we use atomic design, which I really invite you to look into if you're not already familiar with it. And this way, we are able to work on our components in isolation. And this is where the API comes in. Not immediately, but at least we are 100% sure to build components that are independent from the API, because potentially the data can be coming from a CMS platform, the data can be coming from an in-house API, a legacy one, the data can be coming from anywhere. So first, we want to focus on the component in isolation, and be sure with the designer that it's satisfying what the brief is. And from there, we can also tackle some potential future issues because we can change the text, change the background. We can see every version possible of a single component. We can even switch from one language to another, seeing if German will fit, and not only English language, even Thai language. We can test pretty much everything we want, and also have some accessibility checks. And then in parallel, while some developers were working at building the first bits of components, of visual components, we were setting up the ecosystem. In this case, we kept Shopify because it's a great product, but we decided to make it mostly headless, meaning that we use it using API this time, so it's decoupled from the front end. This allows the front-end developers to be fully in control of the look and feel, and they don't necessarily have to have an expertise per se of each of the products. The only thing they have to fully understand is how the API is documented and what are the right entry points. In this case, we've also selected some of the best-in-breed tools out there, one of them being GraphCMS for the content contribution. And it's not specified in this diagram, but that's where also GraphQL enters in. And in the next talk, Gilles from GraphCMS will tell you more about it. But without entering too much in the details, we consumed most of the content from Shopify through GraphCMS that was acting as a gateway. Additionally to that, we've used search.io for the search indexation, and last, SendGrid for the transactional emails. So this is what we call a Mac architecture. I mentioned the Mac Alliance. So Mac stands for microservice, API first, cloud native, headless frontend. And this is how we make sure we can release it all at a single time and finally empower the developers and empower the marketing teams. I said earlier, mostly headless way of using Shopify, because we made one single exception, and this is how also we managed to make it under such little amount of time. We actually kept the Shopify checkout. So that means that we have a common website for every single market, which satisfies what requested the client, being able to release worldwide some products, worldwide some content. But at the same time, if we had to create a checkout for each of those markets, that would be insanely complex. Insanely complex because the laws are different between the US, between Germany, between India. So this could have taken additional days, weeks, months, most likely months, definitely. And Shopify are really good at this, and we are really satisfied with this choice that we made. Deliver early and often. This is a concept you may be familiar with because it's taken obviously from the agile principle, the lean ones, to be more precise, but I will tell you a bit more about how we applied it to this project. So part of this ecosystem, we have GitHub, as you can see, we have Netlify. This may seem like a basic continuous integration flow, but I think there are some interesting details in there that can make a huge difference. So first, every time the user push some code to GitHub and opens a PR, we will trigger some GitHub actions. And those GitHub actions will ask Netlify to create a build. Netlify has this feature that is named deploy URL preview. And where it's really powerful and simple at the same time is that you get an isolated environment, a unique canonical URL that doesn't have any impact on the dev environment, doesn't have any impact on the staging environment, doesn't have any impact on the production, meaning you can do as much tests as you want. This could have been done using Kubernetes, Docker, deploying some kind of server on the fly, generating URLs. Once again, it would have taken additional months, and probably the performance won't be as good as what we got for free. This URL first is also used by the developer himself, but also by some automated tests that we run against it. The first one being a performance measurement test. We use Calibre for that. And we know that it's getting more and more important for everyone to have good performance, not only because we want to satisfy Lighthouse and SEO constraints, but because we want all the users across the world to be able to experiment this website in the best way, whether they have a cheap Android phone or an expensive iPhone, a small bandwidth or a huge one. Second, we also run visual diffing. This one is really astonishing for us. So visual diffing, in our case, we're using Chromatic, but there's another tool that is also amazing and quite similar that is named Percy, that was done by the Browser Stack team. So what it will do is that it will generate a component screenshot every time we deploy and compare it with the previous release. Thanks to that, let's say if you want to update a hero component and change the title, you will know right away if it has any side effects. It will ask you in a UI if that was an intentional change, and this way you're sure not to have any unnecessary impact in other components. Third, code format. So this one is hopefully something you're all using, ESLint at least, eventually Prettier. And to us, it's mandatory because we said we wanted the project to be future-proof. So future-proof means having conventions that we all follow. There's no bad conventions as long as we have conventions. So, and we are pretty satisfied with the out-of-the-box settings. And this will be checked also against this build. One last thing that is part of those automated tests is the code quality check. So in this case, what we call code quality check is running some tests using Sonar Cloud. You could be using Sonar Cube. And where it helps is that it will detect some code duplication, for instance, which is once again important for having a future-proof code, and also a low technical depth. It will also identify some typos, like let's say you declare twice the same property and override it unintentionally in your CSS. So it will check quite a lot of time. And then only we can move to the next step, the quality assurance. So this way, we don't waste people time, because we know that it takes a lot of effort to run some tests. And then only we can ask someone to perform end-to-end testing, making sure that the feature is working as expected. And additionally to that, Sonar Cube and Sonar Cloud are great, but having a code review by a peer is also quite important. That also makes sure that the whole team remains aware about the different updates that are done on the project. And thanks to this process, we can know when we are ready to deploy our code in a bulletproof and confident way. The business impacts. Obviously, we had some expectations from the clients, and most of them, I would say actually all of them, were satisfied. We also got a presentation from them where they shared all the things they think about this new project, because we actually built more than what was initially expected in this MVP, because it was so easy for us to improvise, to add new things, to correct in the middle of, to be simply agile. We had this project that makes it possible to be agile. And we also have some concrete results. One of them being the add to cart actions that increased by 75%, which is obviously satisfying. And we know that add to cart actions are not necessarily concrete purchase. So that's why it's interesting to look into this other KPI, the e-commerce conversion rate, that got increased by 137%. So 130% additional conversions. That's a lot for the clients. And I think we got this possible thanks, obviously, to the new UI that was built by our creative team, and the fact that it's now mobile first, which should be a de facto standard, but it's not necessarily understood by all creatives. And the one that worked on this one and that works at AKQA knows that. Also, performance first, and making sure we load everything under a short amount of time. And Netlify and GraphCMS help for that. And last, also an increase of the usage by 5% of the compare tool that was redesigned, which is obviously always a satisfaction. So I think we can, at this point, move to the Q&A session. Jem?
Wonderful, thank you. And our first question, which I think is incredibly important because I was enjoying all of the graphics. What software did you use for your visual components?
For the visual components, the team used Figma. So I think that's one of the most, let's say, state-of-the-art tool at the moment. Our team used to evolves a lot. They've experimented with Adobe, also XD. They worked a lot with Sketch, but we are insanely happy with Figma. And one thing to mention about it, because as you maybe understood, I'm quite into atomic design, and Figma has a collaboration with the Storybook team, so they can let the designers and the developers to collaborate and have a design review. And this is really important because we need them to sit next to each other. In most of the projects, we see silos with those two teams that should actually work hand in hand. So they are using Figma.
I love Figma, so I love that that's what you're using, and thank you. You mentioned something that's a bit off topic, but I think something that is so important right now is you mentioned how the two teams have to work hand in hand. And with a remote world now, yes, Figma is a tool that we can use to, cross departments. Yet, how are you seeing this work to be able to continue your work with being remote?
I think we will work more and more on that, especially as we are using Chromatic. So Chromatic, this tool that does visual diffing. And actually, they partnered recently directly with the Figma team to have a storybook in Figma. And I just love this thing, and I cannot wait to test it, because as you just question, it will help people to work remotely and feel like they're sitting next to each other. But in this case, we see how the two different jobs, let's say, relates, and they actually mix at some point. And in this precise case, what you get is Storybook running inside of Figma, which to me is just insane. That's a brilliant idea.
Thank you. Thank you. Another questions that we, and this does go into it, how many developers are involved on this project?
Yes, that's an important thing, because I didn't say much about the size of the team, and we actually had a fairly small team, meaning that most of the time we only had 2 developers on this project, 2 senior developers. And first, they are really talented, obviously, but at the same time, they can focus on what matters the most. So their main interaction, as I said, is the Graph CMS entry point that will hide using remote field the Shopify products, for instance. So the marketing people can enter new products inside of the Graph CMS that will interact as a proxy. But the next presentation from my friend Gibbs will tell you more about it.
Interesting.
And I just mentioned 2 developers, and sorry, to complete the list, we also had a technical delivery manager that helped them to set up the various tools, but that was a fairly small team. And for the very last sprint, we had a 3rd one that joined the team. So as you can see, to build an e-commerce project, I think it's quite an efficient small team.
That is really awesome about being able to see such a cool project with it being a small team and what's possible when we really do work together. Now, what are the next steps for this project?
Unfortunately, so not unfortunately, but that's a good news, but the client will take over, because that's one thing we do a lot at AKQA. And in this case, it's always heartbreaking, to let a baby go this way. But sometimes the companies come to us to ask them to make it possible for them to think outside of the box. So that's what thing they've asked for us to come up with this new kind of architecture, this kind of Mac architectures. And as a developer that in the past had to take over some code, I'm really proud of what we will be leaving them. There's not much of documentation, because the code is anyway self-explanatory, and we will produce some, obviously. And what I hope will happen is that we will continue this collaboration. And it's also the case with some of our other clients. They come at us initially to kickstart some projects, but we continue beyond that point. And in this specific case, what I'm thinking about is potentially adding more personalization. I'm thinking about Netlify Edge handlers that allows to render different content depending on the user in a really efficient way, not having some clumsy rendering. We could do some A/B testing, so we can release new features in some part of the globe and see what would be the impacts. We could have feature toggles also to quickly let the marketing team also disable some tech features. So this is the whole point of this kind of architecture. Is how we empower everyone. There's no more battles between the designer that may feel frustrated, between the client that won't manage to get all the things they want to. And this is what we want to continue to pursue, to help them to break through.
I love that. And thank you again for answering all of our questions and joining us for the presentation today. There was a lot to learn about it. So thank you again, and talk soon, Gabriel.
Thank you, Jen.